Hey everybody, Dr. Leith here. I'm going to talk about reliability today. I hope the semester's going well for everybody. I'm recording from my office, so I'm adjusting to using this computer instead of my laptop. I hope everyone is safe and well and enjoying the semester. So let's get into reliability. Oh boy. There we go. Reliability. Okay, so this is an essential component of creating and selecting instrument techniques, whether it's a test like an IQ test, or if you're doing a technique in session with somebody. If you're trying to determine something, then reliability is a necessary component that you have to consider. So, real simply, reliability refers to consistency of the scores, right? And there's different types of reliability. But right now, in terms of vocabulary, reliability means consistency. Does this instrument, does this technique consistently perform well? And conversely, does it consistently perform low, like it's consistently bad, right? So let's kind of illustrate this by imagining that you're going out on a date. It's a rare occasion. You and your loved one have some free time, or maybe you're just going out for a nice dinner with friends and family, and you're gonna go out and you want to have a good time, right? Because your time is so precious. You don't have much time, so you want to go someplace where you know this is going to be a good night. And you narrow it down to one of three places. Chili's, Mama Margie's, a local venue, and Wingstop. Delicious. Your partner, when you're trying to figure out what to eat, points out that half the time when you go to Chili's, the order is wrong, right? Or something's wrong with it. It might be that your partner gets the food and it's exactly right, and yours is very wrong, or vice versa. Or one time you go and it's really great, but the next time it's really bad. So it's low reliability. You don't know what you're going to get. It might be great and it might not be, right? So low reliability. When talking about Mama Margie's, you guys discussed that every time we go, or almost every time we go, 97 times out of 100, everything is perfect. The food is good, the service is good, the music is good, everything's great. It's reliable, right? It performs well. And then you think about Wingstop, your local one, not the chain. And there are times where, most of the time it's good. There have been a few hiccups, right? Maybe not enough seasoning or too much. And it's adequate. It is good enough, right? So of the three, we have a low, we have a good enough, and then we have a high, right? So it's not a hard question to answer which one would be the most assured location to have a good time. And this applies to assessment, right? Now, this is just one aspect of selecting a place, right? Because some of you might be sitting there like, yeah, but it's really good. We could go to one of these like Brazilian steakhouse joints where like they're gonna come and there's a maitre d' and they'll cut the food for you and it's wonderful, but it's also really expensive, right? And that's the same thing with testing, right? There might be a test that is very, very reliable or gives very reliable results, but it's offset perhaps by the time it takes to administer, the time it takes to score, the cost of it, the discomfort that it causes you or your client. So it is only one factor, right? But it is a critical factor, right? If you don't have reliability, then it's do not pass, go, right? If it doesn't have solid enough reliability. You might be wondering what is solid enough, and we're going to get to that later on in this presentation. So as I was saying, this date night example applies to how you choose an appropriate instrument. You should not use an instrument that does not have a history of appropriate reliability. Remember when we looked at the Code of Ethics, it said that you will pick instruments that provide reliable results and they're valid and stuff, and this is part of it. And you might be wondering, well, where do I find this information? Every a test or assessment comes with a manual, how to do it, how to interpret everything, how it was made. And in there, they will report reliability, and they'll say that when we created this test, it demonstrated a reliability of such and such. Journal articles will have it. For you, let's say that you never want to go into academic stuff again, you never want to read a journal article again, you want to graduate and do private practice and have testing be part of it. When you look at testing and assessment materials, it will be there. It's one of the first things that test publishers provide you, because they want you to pick your instrument, and if it has really good reliability, perhaps better reliability than other instruments, then that's something that they're going to put front and center. So that information is not anything that you need to dig especially hard for, but it is something that you need to consider when, for example, maybe you have a client that's from another country and this particular test that you want to use was normed on a very different culture, right? That can affect reliability. So that's where you do a little bit of digging. So again, reliability, consistency of the scores, right? So if I have a depression inventory, it is reliable if it consistently identifies people that truly have depression, and consistently and truly identifies people that do not have depression. My IQ test is reliable or gives reliable scores if it consistently identifies individuals with high IQ, moderate IQ, low IQ, and so on. My eating disorder questionnaire or my eating disorder inventory or interviewing technique is consistent or reliable when it consistently identifies who has disordered eating and who does not. The opposite would be sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it picks, it gives the, I'm using air quotes, the correct result. Sometimes it identifies the person as having anorexia, but other times there are people with anorexia that it does not identify. And that there are people who do not have disordered eating. They're the furthest person from disordered eating, and it registers them as having disordered eating, right? So that would be inconsistent. So how do we establish this? So we got to take a step back for a second. Remember when we talked about latent constructs, that we are trying to observe or measure something that we can't directly look at, right? Like I can't take a blood sample and figure out your personality, your confidence, and things like that. What we're trying to measure is the true score of whatever it is, right? So think of intelligence. You want to do an IQ test, or you want to do an IQ test on a child. Well, it would be great. In a perfect world, we would get this immutable number that says this child has this IQ. This is exactly how smart they are. Right? And so it's kind of like if we had a crystal ball and I wanted to see how smart or how intelligent this person is, that score that I could get, that immutable score, is called a true score, right? It is the truth, right, of how intelligent this person is, or how confident this person is, or what is their level of attachment or trustworthiness or extroversion, whatever it is, right? That's called a true score. Now the thing is that we can't ever get the true score. We'll talk about why in just a second here. What we do get, though, without having the magic crystal ball, is an observed score. So I want to know the intelligence of this child. I can't just look at them. I can't just ask them. But I give them an IQ test. They perform. I do all the scoring and everything, and I get this number. That number is the observed score. That's what I have to work with, right? That's what you get, right? When you're working with a couple and you want to see how strong is their relationship. So you give the relationship assessment scale, and it gives you a number. And that number is, I don't know, let's say it's a 10 out of 15, so pretty good. That's the observed score. That's what you have to work with. And so that observed score comes from them participating in the assessment, right? It's whatever the score is. It's like your grades, right? How good are you at, multicultural counseling or assessment or human development, right? Well, I can't look at you and just tell. I can't just ask you. So we give you a test, right? And what I get on that test is the observed score. And if it's really high, no one ever has a problem with it, right? Like if you got a 100, you're not going to be like, oh, I was having a really lucky day. But if it was bad, you would probably say, I don't think that's reflective of what I know, but that's what I have to work with. So what keeps us from getting the true score? That is called error, right? And error is a big thing, right? It's a big thing in terms of statistics, assessment, creating tests and things like that. Errors everywhere. And so it is anything that gets in the way of knowing the true score. And that's a lot of different things. And so that includes things like faulty instruction. If you take a test and it's really noisy, if you're feeling sick, if there's a typo on the exam, right? All of those things. Have you ever taken a test where someone else in the room, it's completely quiet, but you keep hearing someone cough or clear their throat? Maybe they're drumming. I don't know if you can hear that on the computer, but I'm drumming my fingers, clicking their pen. And you're getting distracted. You're trying to listen, but you keep hearing this. And that distraction is error, right? And it keeps us from getting the true score. So just to kind of really highlight it again, because error, like you're going to hear that term a lot through testing and development and in this class and in other classes. So here's what I think is an easy way to imagine it. I just want everybody to be comfortable with it. Imagine you're on a road trip and you're having a good time. You're driving out, you got the mountains in the background. Looks like a nice car. You're safe. You got your seatbelt on. And you're just jamming out to your radio, right? You're listening to some BTS or whatever, and you're having a good time. And what happens as you drive further away from the city? What happens on the radio? I know probably everybody listens to Spotify now, but what happens? You start getting some static, right? Zzz, static. Now, a little bit of static isn't bad. You can still make out the words, the beat, the music, everything. A little bit of static, not too bad. But as you drive further away from the city, what happens? Big static, right? And now you can't make out the words, and it's not as fun anymore, right? It's not as much, you're not as happy, The static's getting in the way of what you're hearing. Or conversely, imagine you're at a party or at a concert where it's really loud and you're trying to have a conversation with somebody. I don't know why you'd have a conversation at a concert now that I think about it, but let's say you did. The music is so loud you can't make out what the other person is saying, right? That's error. So error is just static. It is stuff that keeps us from hearing or seeing the true score. So let's kind of recap just briefly. And this is so not the end of this video. It's just to recap what we've covered so far. We want to know the truth about some aspect of the person, right? I want to know, is this, there's a scale for would this person be a good parent to adopt children? There's a scale, is this person with substance use problems likely to relapse? We want to know the truth about that. Can I trust this person? Is this person going to be a good leader? Whatever it might be, right? We want to know the truth about it. Error, that static, will prevent us from getting that true score. Error is in every assessment. It is in every assessment. There is not one that does not have some amount of error. Now, there are some that have very little, and there are some that have a whole lot, but there is not one that has zero. And so we manage the error as best we can, and what we're left with is the observed score, right? So at the bottom down here, right, this is what it would look like kind of condensed to a formula, if that's helpful. The true score, which is what we want, is blocked by error, right? So true score plus error, so how conscientious you are, plus, you didn't really understand the instructions, or you had a bad day, or you got into a fender bender on the way to take the test and the guy just drove off, so now you're not feeling particularly conscientious, right? We're left with the observed score. So error comes in two flavors: systematic and random. Systematic error are things like typos, poor instructions, poor grading, or there's a mistake where maybe on Blackboard you take your quiz and I put in the wrong value for a question, so you don't get the full credit for the question. Language translations, right? Maybe you're working with a client whose native language the test is not in. But for all of these, it can be controlled for. Typos, I can fix. Poor instructions, like maybe I wrote a question that was really funky, it didn't make any sense. I can discard it, right? I can get rid of it. I can give everybody credit for it. I can control for it, right? I can control for all these things. Random error, I cannot control for. So this would be, you have your midterm, you have the NCE, you have your GRE, you have the STARS test, whatever, and you're sick, you have the flu. You were up all night, right? A child needs to do his IQ test or standardized testing, and he was fortnighting all night. Just innate confusion, like the person didn't pay attention in class or didn't follow instructions, right? So right now, in the age of COVID, right, random error would be everything is online. So I think of like my two little ones, and they're in school and they're going to have to do their testing, but they now have to do the test online in their home, right? And so there's the distraction because they're their toys, mom and dad are there. It's just really easy. You've got all these other competing things in there. But even if I took away all the toys and mom and dad went into their bedroom and left the kids to take their test, they're still having to adjust to there's not a live person here, right? Discomfort, right? So some of these tests and assessments, or even counseling in general, you may ask questions that make your client uncomfortable, right? About drug use, relationships, sex, abuse, trauma, money, all of that stuff. And that discomfort can kind of get in the way. And it might be, for example, on the MMPI-2, a personality assessment, one of the questions is, my father is a good man, true or false? And I might be incredibly uncomfortable talking about my father, so I skip it, right? I skip that question. I might make up numbers, right, out of shame or something like that. Think about with food or weight, right? Mishaps, right? I'm driving and I get into a car accident, or I'm rushed, I'm flustered because traffic was especially bad, and when I arrived, I was all just discombobulated and not in a good state of mind. And so those are harder to control for. So real life example, when I first started teaching, I had a teaching assistant who convinced me, why don't you put your assessment midterm online? I'll do this, like scan all the questions and everything. And we did that. And one of the questions, like the correct answer was A. And on Blackboard, I marked it as D. So everybody answered A, which is correct, and everybody got it wrong, right? So for that was easy, right? I go back into Blackboard, say, no, the right answer is actually A, and that error is corrected. Now, as an example of on systemic error or random error is you're going to go take your NCE, and the night before you get no sleep. You're maybe too restless. You wake up late because you got no sleep. You're rushing and you spill your coffee on yourself, and then you're taking the test and it's really, really cold, right? You're just uncomfortable. All of that stuff interferes, right? Because maybe you're not able to perform to the best of your ability, and it comes in the form of things like not paying attention to the question, not paying attention to the answers, maybe skipping over stuff on your Scantron, right? So recapping error and reliability, the takeaway here is as error increases, reliability decreases. It's that simple, right? So an instrument that has a lot of error will not be reliable, and an instrument that has high reliability has controlled for a lot of error, or it's not sensitive to that error. So how do we measure it? So you're wondering, how am I supposed to know that? So these are the main types of ways to determine reliability of an instrument. And this happens on the developer end, and this is what they wind up telling you. We established reliability by doing a test retest, an alternate forms test, split half, and so on. All right, so that's what they're presenting to you. So test, retest. So these are all methods, in other words, of establishing reliability. The test, retest method is pretty self-explanatory. So let's say that I want to make a confidence scale, and I want to see how confident graduate students are. Let's see how well it works. I give it to you all today, right? Let's just say that this is the first of the month. I give it to you. I wait, and then I give it to you again, right? So think, what would indicate that the test is reliable? So you're correct if you're thinking, well, if the scores are the same, right? So on day one, it says that the people who are confident are actually confident, the people who are not confident are not confident, and then it gives the same results later on. It's reliable, right? Time tested, right? But how long do we need to wait before the second administration of the test? And there's a range between 2 weeks and 6 weeks. Waiting longer than that, you're actually measuring time change over time, right? If I gave it to you today and then again in a year, I'm not really testing reliability. I'm really testing, how have you changed over the course of a year, right? So I need to give this test 2 times to the same group, with time in between administrations. Giving the second administration too soon wouldn't do us any good, because you probably just feel the same way that you did the first time. Waiting too long, change over time. Parallel or alternate forms. So here I give you my confidence scale, and then I give a second administration of similar and equivalent questions to another group, right? And good reliability would be that the 2 scores are correlated, right? Making similar mistakes, as performing the same. So here I've got to ask, maybe I ask 10 questions. I then need to come up with alternate forms of those 10 questions, right? So it might be, most days I feel good about myself. That's form A. And then on form B, it might be, most days I don't feel good about myself, right? And I would expect people to score similarly. Split half. So just like it sounds, imagine I have a test with 100 questions. I give one group, right? I split my group right in half, and I say, group A, you answer all the even questions. Group B, you answer all the odd questions, right? Or I randomly, I put it into a computer and I randomly split up the questions for the group to answer. And so we would hope that we would have similar, again, consistent findings. With here, the we need to make sure that the questions, the content of the questions, is evenly distributed, right? So if like all the even questions were math questions and all the odd questions were English questions or literature questions, we need to kind of scramble that up so that way it's an even mix. It is truly split. Interscore is for more subjective things. So if you took the GRE and you did the writing portion, this is how it was assessed, right? So you write something and 2 or more people read it, and we would hope that they come reasonably close to the same determination, right? Person A reads your response and says, this is really good. They give you a check plus, and person B gives you a check plus or a check, right? There is interscore reliability. If person A gave you a smiley face and then person B gave you a sad face, then we have an issue, right? What happened here? And in this case, we'd probably get a third person to look at it. But if it was always one person scoring high and one person scoring low, right, then it probably does not have good reliability. Internal consistency. So this is the big one. This is the main one that you will often see. In fact, I cannot think of an assessment that did not report this one. They might report some of the other ones, but this one is also always there, or it's the only one. And so this is the only one. So I want to be very clear. This is the only method that requires only one administration of the test, right? And this deals with taking those questions, those items, whatever, the questions on the test, they run them through the computer and see how well they dance together, see how they work together. So, for example, if I was making a body image instrument to determine who has body confidence and who has body dissatisfaction, you'd expect there to be questions like, I'm happy with my body, I would not change anything on my body, there are many things I would change on my body, I don't like my body. Those questions all sort of relate to one another. But then if I threw in a random one, such as I like reading horror novels. I like reading Stephen King. That question doesn't fit in with the other 4, does it? Right? So I like my body, I don't like my body. I would change my body, I wouldn't change my body. I love Stephen King. Right? That doesn't fit in. It doesn't fit in anywhere. And so that's internal consistency. It's seeing how well the items mesh together. And so when we run this one, we get what's called an alpha. Specifically, it's called Cronbach's alpha. It's the little fish guy. And it gives us a hard score. It gives us a number between 0 and 1, right? It's always going to be point something something. Now don't freak out because there's numbers. It's real simple. A score of 1 would mean that it's perfectly reliable and it has 0 error. That's impossible. Remember what I said earlier, every instrument has error. So if someone came up with a 1, that would be, I think it would be impossible. If someone came up with a score higher than 1, then they really made a mistake. You cannot score higher than 1. So if someone came knocking on your door and said, I've got a brand new IQ test, and it's got a reliability of 1.21, they either made a mistake or they're just lying. A score of 0 means it's nothing but error, which is it's practically impossible. Like, you could probably make a test that had nothing but error, but again, like, why would you waste your time and money and energy doing that? So the higher, the better. That's a takeaway. The higher the alpha, the better. The higher the number, the more reliable it is, and the less error it has. Case in point, the higher the score, the more reliable the results. And again, this is included with tests. It'll say such and such test has a reliability of whatever. And so this is the takeaway. So put a star by this, write it, get it tattooed. The standard is anything that is 0.7 or higher is acceptable, with higher being better. So by convention, 0.7 and up is acceptable. Lower than that, you should really consider looking elsewhere. And I mean, there's always exceptions, right? It might be that this is the only instrument that measures the thing that you're trying to measure, right? But otherwise, you would need to have a pretty sufficient reason for using one that's below 0.7. So that's kind of reliability in a nutshell. We have a little bit left. I think this is a good place if you want to take a break, especially because it gets a little numbery, but nothing you can't handle, I promise. Again, it's just like the standard deviation business. But if you need to take a break to kind of refresh yourself, this would be a good time to go ahead and pause and then come back when you're feeling good. We've just got a few more slides, but it gets a little technical, but nothing you can't handle. I'm going to keep going, pause, and come on back when you're ready. So standard error of measure. We got to go back to error. So remember, every test has error. How do you know that your score is being lowered because of error, right? So in other words, you're saying, no, I really know. So that example I gave of you went to take the NCE, you didn't sleep, you woke up late, you spilled your coffee, you rushed, the room's cold, you got your score, not what you wanted, and you say, hey, there's error. This isn't right, this isn't accurate, right? So almost all instruments have what's called a standard error of measure, and that's what helps us manage the error that was in this NCE example. So remember, error is in every instrument. Standard error of measure is how much error is expected to be in an assessment and how we should interpret the results. So think about, have you ever had a friend or know someone, you talk to them, and they exaggerate every story, and so you know to kind of compensate, like it probably wasn't that bad or probably wasn't that great, whatever. That's what SEM kind of does for us. So it tells us this assessment has some error, and whatever the score is, whatever your client gets, the true score is probably off by a few points. So it gives us a range. It gives us a range of scores that the person's true score probably lies within. And these ranges are called confidence intervals. So for example, you take a test, you got an 88. You feel like, I was having a bad day, I was kind of sleepy, my allergies were really flaring up. And there's a standard error of measure of 3 points. So what this means is that we tap on 3 points to both sides of the observed score. So you got an 88. What I wind up presenting is you got an observed score of 88, and your true score is most likely between an 85 and a 91. That range, in theory, is to compensate for the error that might be present. Confidence intervals give us a range, and that helps. So imagine, and I think I have this example coming up, but imagine with parents, and they want to have their child tested maybe for giftedness. The child does not reach that threshold for whatever we call it now. For when I was in school, it's called gifted and talented. They didn't reach that. They're a great student. All that stuff is there. They just didn't quite meet the mark for giftedness. Mom and dad say that's impossible. He's so smart, right? He's got to be gifted. And what we're saying essentially is, right, maybe he did have a bad day taking the test, but if he were to take it 100 times, his score might be a few points higher, and it might also be a few points lower, but we expect it to always be within this range. So let's kind of tie that together. If a test has a lot of error in it, it means that it has a large standard error of measure. So remember when I gave the example of an 88, and so, to control for error, throw on 3 points. If it has a lot of error, then we got to throw on 10 points, 15 points, 20 points. If it has a big standard error of measure, it has a large confidence interval and it would have low reliability. Let me give an example. The more error a test has, the less confident we can be about the accuracy of the scores. So confidence intervals work like this. I am 68% sure, 90% sure, 80% sure that your true score is between X and Y, right? So you can imagine explaining these results to people who are unhappy with the results, saying, I could have done better. And we're kind of saying, barring exceptional circumstances, no, like you might do a few points higher. You might also do a few points lower, right? You could have just guessed really well, right? You wouldn't say that, but you might think it. And so confidence intervals work like this. I don't know where any of you live, but I am 100% confident that you live on Earth. I am 95% certain you live in the US. I'm 90% confident that you live in Texas. I'm actually 100% sure you all live in Texas. I am 50% sure you live in San Antonio, because maybe some of you live in Bernie or San Marcos or Austin. I am 30% sure you live in the NEISD school district. I am 15% sure you live in Stone Oak. I am 5% sure you live on such and such street. And so do you see what's happening here? The more specific I become, the less confident I become. So in terms of testing, that's the same slide. In terms of testing, think of it this way. Imagine giving an IQ test, or the gifted test. The child scores a 100, which is average. And you report the score, and the parents, they're saying this is not right. We know he is above average. We know he's a genius. And you look at your test manual, and it tells you that to be 68% confident, and it does specify 68%. I don't want anybody to think I just threw up numbers, but 68% is one confidence interval. 68% confident, the score will be plus or minus 20 points. So that means what you report to mom and dad is, I am 68% certain that your child's true score is between an 80 and a 120. Now most people, this is a practical piece, most people only focus on the it could be higher part of this and ignore the it could also be lower, right? And so that's why when you talk about retesting, that's why this conversation is important, is that we're saying I don't expect, if I gave your child a test 100 times, I think his score is always going to be between these two things, right? And unless there was an exceptional reason, like he had the flu, or he just, the morning of the test, he found out there was a death in the family, something really egregious, testing, again, is not going to really make a difference in terms of the score. So the parents say 68% certain. That's not very confident, and also what an odd number. You look at the manual again, and it'll tell you you can offer up 95% confidence, but you got to add on another standard error of measurement, which now means we have to add 40 points on both sides. So now I'm saying I'm 95% certain your child scores between 60 and 140. So you might be saying, just to be clear, where did that come from? Here, the manual says that to be 68% confident, add on 20 points. This is one SEM, and it's in the manual, so it's different for every test. It'll say to be 68% confident, add one SEM. You look up what is an SEM for this test. It says 20 points. So we add 20 points onto the score, and we subtract 20 points. That's for one. Now to be more confident, add another SEM. So that means 20, and then another 20 this way, and then 20 and another 20 this way, so that gives us 60 and 40. And then parents say, only 95%, be more confident, and usually tests will only give you three options. The 68, 95, and 98% confidence. I'm 98% confident that your child's true score is between a 40 and a 160. So you're adding on points, and as you become more confident, that range becomes less accurate, right? So this, between 40 and 160, that's not helpful, because he could have scored incredibly low or incredibly high, right? But you don't know. But to be more specific, between 80 and 120, we're a little bit less confident, right? So this is kind of an exaggerated example just to get familiar with the idea that tests and assessments come with these units called standard error of measure, and you tack them on to the person's score to compensate for error. And when you're reporting, you're saying, here's the range that I think your true score is in. When the conversation comes up that says, well, what if I had, I didn't eat breakfast that day, or I felt rushed, or my throat was bothering me, we would be saying, right, but we're still pretty positive if you took it again and again and again and again, your score is always going to be between this and that. It's typical for scores to vary attempt to attempt. Here we're talking about, though, that what the standard error of measure does is telling us that you're probably not going to score magnitudes higher or lower. And again, most people focus on the aspect of, but I could have done better. And again, it might be an uncomfortable conversation. The truth is, you could also do worse, right? You may have guessed incredibly well, or just gotten lucky. And so if you were to test this person 100 times, we don't think that the score would differ in any clinically significant way. It might go up a point or two. So imagine you took your midterm and you got an 80, and something happens to everybody when we get to grad school where B's now are like, we can't do that. And so you don't want to take that, even though B means above average. You get an 85, and you say, well, but Dr. Leith, I didn't sleep. I got into a fight with my partner, and if I take it again, I'm gonna tell you, yeah, maybe, but you might score higher by a point or two, and you might score lower by a point or two. But I do not think it's the case that you are going to score. You go from an 85 to being a perfect score any more than I think you're going to go from an 85 to a complete 0 on the test, right? Instead, it's you might bump up to an 87 or an 88. You might bump down to an 83 or an 82, but this is your score. It's been that type of error, the random error, has been accounted for by using the standard error of a measure and the confidence intervals. So let's wrap up, and this is the big wrap up. Reliability refers to consistency of scores, getting accurate scores time and again. It is influenced by the amount of error in the assessment. Error comes in two varieties: systemic and random. I can control for systemic in some ways, but I cannot control for random error. We measure reliability in a variety of different ways, and that is reported in every instrument. 0.7 and higher is the acceptable cutoff. And we control for error by including the standard measure, error of measure, and confidence intervals. SEM tells us how much error is present and how to compensate for it, and confidence intervals tells us how to report a range of scores to our clients. That's going to do it for this. I know that was a lot. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns. I'm going to wrap up here. I hope each of you is well, and I will talk to you all again soon. Bye-bye.